welcome. We have a rare opportunity today to meet and talk with Rick Steves, travel writer, producer, who's been inspirational in many ways in the life of our students, and very practical guides that are very useful to many people that I know. So we're looking forward to this conversation. With me is Dr. Heather Crandall, Chair of the Communication and Leadership Studies Department. I'm Dr. John Caputo. I'm Professor of Communication and Leadership and a Walter Ong Scholar. And with us again this afternoon is Rick Steves. Rick, welcome to Gonzaga. Welcome to the university. We're here on a very snowy afternoon, so great day. We're just kind of curious about a number of things that sort of have influenced us about your writing, your travel programs, but also that might be interesting for our students. The first thing is just a general question. When did you first start traveling, and what made you think maybe I could make a business out of this?
Mm-hmm. I never wanted to go to Europe, and just because of the circumstances of my family, my dad, who is a piano teacher, started importing pianos from Germany. So he needed to go see the piano factories, and we have relatives in Norway. So when I was 14 years old, they took me to Europe to see the piano factories and to visit relatives in Norway. And I distinctly remember thinking, this is a stupid idea. I thought, in that mindset, I don't speak that language, why am I going over there? I haven't even seen my country yet.
And how old were you?
I was 14.
14, okay.
But then I remember very distinctly after a couple of days thinking, this is not that bad. There was different candy, different pop. I remember there was one-armed bandits in the hotel lobbies I could gamble. I distinctly remember statuesque women with hairy armpits. As I thought, wow, this world is very interesting. It's different. And then a couple years later, we were in Europe again, visiting relatives in Norway and piano factories in Germany. And I was in the train station in Copenhagen, and I remember seeing kids a couple years older than me with rucksacks, Eurail passes, no parents, and Europe was their playground. And I looked at my mom and dad, and then I looked at those kids, and I looked at my mom and dad, and I thought, I don't need you guys for this. And I remember vowing to go back to Europe every year for the rest of my life, just for kicks, because it's just a fun thing to do in the summer. And I did, and then after 4 or 5 trips, it was really clear I was learning from my mistakes, and it pained me to see other people screwing up just like I did last year when I knew the lesson. You don't change $20 traveler's checks in Norway because they charge $4 per check, not per transaction. You see, when you change $100, right, you're going to lose $16 extra, and if you're a budget traveler, that hurts. It's not going to ruin your trip, but these green Americans ahead of me were changing $20 traveler's checks. I learned that, and I had a $100 traveler's check. I was going to get 16% more from that exchange. I thought if I could just package these lessons into a class, I would have a neat little excuse to go back to Europe and update my material every year. Right. So I offered that class at the University of Washington's Experimental College, just for kicks, and I offered it, and I thought a bunch of kids from the dorm would sign up, and it was their parents, 100 parents signed up, each willing to pay $8 to hear me tell stories about Europe. I remember going through I lived in the dorms there, and I went to the class with like $102 bills, and I came home with $110 bills. And all I had to do was tell stories and show slides for a few weeks, and ever since then I've been teaching. I've found this little niche. People want to learn from my mistakes rather than their own so they can enjoy maximum travel thrills for every mile, minute, and dollar. And I've spent a third of my adult life since then in Europe making mistakes, taking careful notes, packaging those lessons and bringing it home. Now I'm doing the same thing I was doing back then, but I have a staff of 80, and I've got technology that amplifies my teaching beyond my wildest dreams. So I can produce a national public radio show in a closet in my office, literally. I can produce the most widely watched travel on television right out of my office, and it's all guerrilla production from a guy who's doing the same thing he was as a husky.
That you mentioned the staff of 80 is a nice entrance into our second question, which is what, in terms of leadership and communication, what are those roles in your organization with your staff of 80? How do you do that communication piece?
Well, that's a real important challenge. You can be a great traveler, but it doesn't mean you know diddly about running a business, So I'm pretty humble about that. And I see my staff as partners. When Thomas Jefferson wrote his epitaph for his tombstone, he didn't say he didn't want to remember as a president. He was a president of a university or a college, right? That was what he really valued and what he did. One of the things that I would value when I'm all done is having employed people well. And for me, it's really important to provide good employment and, you know, profit off your employees, but give people meaningful work and exciting challenges and security and creative options and share in the productivity. So it's a beautiful family we've got at Europe Through the Back Door. I don't run the business. I have what we call a business team of 5 people, and I'm one of them, and I'm gone for months a year.
Yeah.
And I don't micromanage. I used to do that, and life's too short to micromanage. So I'm just thankful that they, you know, there's many different ways to skin a business cat, and I don't always agree with what they do, but it works, and we're fine. And I get to go to Europe and still do what I like to do, which is, you know, do the hikes and check out the hotels and find the little restaurants.
When you're there, do you maintain daily contact with home folks?
I do only in the marketing end of my business. I'm more in the copywriting, marketing, production end of our business. I don't really pay much attention to the grind of running a business and human resources management and issues of day-to-day keeping the business going and, you know, inventory and all that kind of stuff. That just really gets me depressed. But I stay in touch with I really think where I contribute in my business is helping produce our content and then keeping our marketing edgy and fun.
One of the things Gonzaga has for a long time had a number of overseas international programs. And in our master's program, we actually have a small immersion project in a small village up in Apennine in central Italy. And our intent is to try to have people become more immersed and outside of the main tourist places,
right.
To kind of get them out of that American cocoon, the high level of touring they read about in tour books, and when they're in big cities where they can't really sort of meet people exactly. But your books are always very helpful about trying to be as close to the culture as possible. And you're not down market exactly, because sometimes you say, well, I splurge when I'm in Rome, I get air conditioning.
Right.
I do X when I'm here. So could you kind of talk about how you see this value so travelers are not just in a cocoon of American experiences?
Boy, that's the challenge. And we are victims of a lot of marketing in Europe as tourists. We're consumers, and everybody wants us to consume their stuff, and they're hitting us all the time with their glitter and gloss. And you see tourists in Venice just sort of in a in a trance, walking from the Rialto Bridge over to St. Mark's and back, and they never leave that shopping corridor because you've got colorful English things and lots of beads and trinkets, and it's just kind of mesmerizing. And you got to physically make a point to get away from all that easy tourist track and struggle and make mistakes and find yourself lost and need people and meet people. There's 2 kinds of people you can meet as a traveler in Europe. You can meet people who are camping out where the bus lets people out to see the Vatican Museum, and they're just waiting to sell you stuff as soon as you get off the bus. There's that kind of Italian. And the average American, that's the only Italian they meet, you know. Or you can get away from that, and then you find yourself, rather than part of the economy, part of the party. And that's sort of a philosophical goal in my travels. Somebody told me the name of the place where your program is.
Cayey.
Cayey, yeah. You've done a good job, because I've never heard that name. So I don't know where that is, and I imagine that's a real blessing when you're trying to get people immersed in the culture.
Yeah.
Because then they are visiting students rather than tourists.
Right.
And that's a beautiful thing, yeah.
Last winter, I picked up, actually through your marketing, I found this book. It was offered to educators for $5.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, I'll get that book. I'm really curious about the book.
Good.
And it comes close to our philosophy of our program. And I thought, well, let me read what he's meaning by this. And why did you? So my question is, because so far we're using it, find it very valuable, but wonder what was motivating you to put this new spin on what travel's about.
Yeah, that travel as a political act is the latest sort of evolution of my teaching. And you know, when I cross the border, they say, what's your job? What's your occupation? I say, teacher. I still fancy myself as a teacher. And for 30 years, I've been teaching Americans how to travel smartly and thoughtfully in Europe. Now, if I follow the evolution of my teaching, and I'm an independent, self-employed kind of guy. I can teach whatever I want. You've hired me to come here tonight and give a talk. I can talk about anything I want, you know. And I just follow how my teaching has gone, where my heart has been in my teaching for the last 30 years. And, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, is the pyramid. And creatures, humans or animals or whatever, are going to take care of their bottom needs first: food, clothing, safety, roof over your head, and then you can entertain yourself and you can be creative and then you can be altruistic and fulfilled or whatever. You got that sort of evolution. And my teaching has sort of done its own traveler's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For the first decade of my teaching, 1980s, it was all about budget travel tips. It was Europe through the back door,
Right.
you know, how to catch the bus, how to get a good train pass, where to find a good hotel in a youth hostel or whatever. And then in the 90s, I thought, well, that's taken care of. In the 90s, I wrote a book called Europe 101, History and Art for Travelers. And my passion was trying to inspire and equip Americans to properly enjoy the history, the art, appreciate the culture, the cuisine, the wine, all that kind of stuff. So that was the 90s, and that was Europe 101. And then ever since 9/12, my real teaching energy has been in helping Americans gain a broader perspective through their travels. We're just 4% of this planet, and we're seeing right now this talk of exceptionalism, you know, that we are an exceptional 4%. Only if you've never been out of this country would you believe we're an exceptional 4%. I don't want to sound unpatriotic. I'm American through and through, but I'm smart enough to know we're not exceptional. We're good, but there's other people who are good too, you see. And from a Christian point of view, you know, a lot of people say, God bless America. Well, that is so counter to Christian basic beliefs. God created all the people on this planet, not just the Americans. And he's not a parent that loves some kids more than others. And maybe these kids have to get out and get to know the family a little more, you see.
Yeah.
So there's the irony, the sad irony of 9/11 is it causes the people who need to travel most to be less likely to travel. Because of fear and because of misguided patriotism and economic self-interest, they decide to stay home. Be patriotic, you know, stay home. I would argue, be patriotic. It's good for national security for us to better understand the rest of the world, so they have a tougher time demonizing us with their propaganda, and so our propaganda has a tougher time causing us to demonize the rest of the world. It's a very powerful thing in this day and age to get out and travel, and when you see so much fear rattling around in our society, it's clear to me fear is for people who don't get out very much. Your students who live and study in Italy, they're going to be less fearful after that experience rather than before that experience. And they'll probably be less fearful than their aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas who are thinking, oh, are you going to go over there? Didn't they just kidnap some girl? And what about the guy on the boat and all this kind of thing? You know, people got to get a grip when it comes to that. So I'm really sort of really excited about helping inspire people not just to travel, but to travel in a way that doesn't exaggerate the gap between us and them, but creates empathy and helps us connect and understand each other better. And for me, the conclusion of that book is the best souvenir you can bring home is a broader perspective.
Good. So a follow-up to that question is what, you know, in your book you mentioned that preparing to travel and how travel is a political act. So it sounds like your answer gets at that how travel is a political act just by going.
Well, travel is a broadening act by going.
By going.
By gaining a broader perspective, then you come home, and when you engage politically in society, then it becomes a political act. It's not a political act until you come back and you act as a citizen who's a citizen of the planet as well as a citizen of this country. Then it's exciting, the differences can make. But my hope is that people would have the perverse kind of enlightened approach to voting where they step into the privacy of a voting booth and they don't vote for what's in their personal short-term financial interest, but that they vote for what's in the interest of economic justice and fairness and people who are desperate, who are going to be impacted more by this election than people who are more richly blessed. That's the irony. You know, whoever wins the election doesn't really matter to me that much, but it matters to people who are struggling. And I, not because I'm a saint or anything like that, but just because I've traveled and I can humanize struggles and I can have empathy with these people. Now, when I step into a booth or when I talk politics with people, I'm not advocating for me. I'm advocating for people who are desperate. And in order to sell that to half of America, you got to spin it in a way that appeals to their fears and their greed. I hate to say. So you just got to tell people, I don't care even if you're motivated only by greed. If you know what's good for you, you don't want to be filthy rich in a desperately poor world.
Right.
And you could sell it. I mean, that's reason enough to vote in the interest of economic justice.
You know, last summer, we had a couple in our program overseas, and the wife had a problem with health, and so I took her into emergency room in the small hospital. And after x-rays and other kinds of things they did, et cetera, we got done after about a half hour. I was kind of doing some translation of that. Then I asked for the bill, and they said there'd be no bill. No bill. And so the couple just kept, well, how can they do that? How do they do that? What is? And so this was right in the middle of our own looking at health issues in the United States, and they just thought, how does that work? And in
they look at us and say, how can you live without that?
How can you live? Yeah, exactly, that kind of orientation to that.
Well, it's an interesting comment about the healthcare, because for 25 years I've been a tour guide, and every time I have to take people into the emergency room or something, it's the same sort of shock.
Yeah.
How can you do that? Well, you know, it's covered in your taxes, and we've been paying taxes on our whole trip. We're paying $8 for a beer instead of $4 for a beer, and you know that's paying for their health care. So you need to use the health care, enjoy it.
Yeah, good.
And gasoline has been more expensive in Europe for quite some time.
Well,
That's part of,
in
is that
Europe,
part of that?
you know, I've been thinking about the fundamental differences between Europe and America, because we're very similar kind of sister societies. We're wealthy, Christian, capitalist, free, literate, all that kind of stuff. And really care about a government by, for, and of the people. And I really believe, and I talked about this in Travel as a Political Act, here in the United States, we're a government by, for, and of the people via the corporations that we own. It's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just what we decide. And it makes sense to have a government that creates a good business environment so our corporations can prosper. Europe, on the other hand, is government by, for, and of the people in spite of the corporations that they own, trying to create a sustainable and a just society, maybe at the expense of short-term economic affluence. And a good example is, I think you'd be much more likely to see a law that required you to pay for the disposal of your car when you bought it in Europe than here, because that's not good for business. It's just honest accounting, you see. So these are fun issues to deal with, and as we grapple with pretty serious challenges here in the United States, I think it's just healthy and constructive to see how other smart, caring societies are dealing with the same problems, because sometimes we keep butting our head up against the wall, just doing the same thing over and over again, when our friends on the other side of the Atlantic have got it figured out in a more effective and pragmatic way.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Happy travels.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, good.